Imagine scrolling through your phone on a random Tuesday, and your best friend sends you a link that, in a single click, destroys 8 years of your life. No warning, no build up, just gone. That's exactly what happened to this guy. And trust me, what comes next? Nobody saw it coming. Meet Jamie and her boyfriend. 8 years together. 8 years. That's not just a relationship, that's a life built together. Shared inside jokes, late night conversations, plans for the future, talks about marriage. The kind of bond most people spend their whole lives searching for. He wasn't some lovesick kid either. This was a guy who had been through real hardship, a rough childhood, a complicated family, personal battles with depression. And through all of it, Jamie was there. She was the one who told him to start journaling, to process his feelings, to fight for himself. She helped build him into the man he became, and he loved her for it, completely, unconditionally. So when his good friend Alex called him and said, "Hey, we need to talk," he had absolutely no idea what was coming. It started with a guy named Mike. Mike was browsing the internet one night, specifically some niche corners of adult websites, when he stumbled onto something that made his stomach drop: a video. A very specific kind of video. And the woman in it? It was Jamie. Mike immediately reached out to Alex. The two of them sat with this information for a moment, probably feeling sick themselves, before deciding they had to tell their friend. Because that's what real friends do, even when the truth is brutal. When they finally broke the news, our guy went completely silent. Not the processing kind of silent, the nothing left inside kind of silent. He couldn't speak, he couldn't think, he just sat there. And then they showed him the video. He lasted less than 60 seconds before he had to stop. Because the video wasn't just some blurry, hard to identify clip. No, it was edited to start immediately, and Jamie's face was clearly visible from the very first frame. Whoever made that video wanted her to be recognized. That detail alone should tell you everything you need to know about what kind of person they were dealing with. They drove Mike home. Alex, showing more level headed thinking than most people could manage in that moment, insisted that his friend not go home that night. "You're not going home to her right now," Alex said. "That's not happening." And honestly, that might have been the most important decision made that entire night. The two of them sat together, barely talking, just a couple of beers and the weight of the world between them. Alex tried to gently ask how his friend was feeling. The answer? I don't know. Not because he was hiding it, but because he genuinely didn't know. He described it later as walking through chest deep water. No thoughts, no direction, just movement. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and he passed out on Alex's couch. When he woke up the next morning, one thing had crystallized in his mind with brutal clarity. The relationship was probably over. He took public transit home, disheveled, hollow eyed, doing his best impression of someone who had it together. When he walked through the door, Jamie was on her way out, casual as ever, asking where he'd been and why he hadn't answered her texts. He didn't answer her question. He just said, "We need to talk." They sat down at the kitchen table, a table they had built themselves on his grandfather's farm, and the moment that memory hit him, something broke wide open. All that numb emptiness cracked apart, and suddenly he was crying and furious and devastated all at once, asking her how she could destroy something they had worked so hard to build. Jamie was confused at first, demanding to know what was happening, so he didn't dance around it. He showed her the video. What followed was one of the most emotionally raw moments you can imagine between two people. Tears, accusations, pleading, more tears. He told her it was over. And that's when something strange happened. Something that would spiral this entire situation into territory none of them were prepared for. Jamie just shut down, mid conversation, mid tears. She went completely still, closed her eyes, and stopped responding entirely. Not dramatic storming off, not screaming, just nothing, like someone had pulled the plug. He tried everything, spoke to her softly, then firmly, shook her gently, still nothing. Complete disconnect from reality. Scared? and not knowing what else to do, he carried her to their bedroom, laid her down, and then did something that surprised even him. He called her parents. And that's where this story stops being just a heartbreak story and starts being something much more complicated. Alice and Julio arrived fast. The kind of fast that only happens when a parent hears panic in someone's voice and doesn't ask questions. They just move. They burst through the door, demanding to know what happened, and he kept it simple. Their daughter had suffered some kind of breakdown. She was in the bedroom. She was physically okay, but something was wrong. They rushed to her side, tried everything he had already tried: soft voices, firm voices, gentle touch. Nothing worked. Jamie was completely unreachable, breathing, alive, but gone behind her own eyes. And that's when he had to make a decision he didn't want to make. He told them he hadn't planned to drop this on them without Jamie present. That felt wrong, like talking about someone behind their back while they're right there in the next room. But the situation had officially moved past the point of waiting for the right moment, so he pulled out the video and he showed Jamie's parents what their daughter had done. The silence that followed was devastating. Alice and Julio weren't angry, at least not in the explosive way you might expect. They were just crushed, like watching two people absorb a physical blow in slow motion. After a long, heavy moment, they made the decision to take Jamie to the psychiatric clinic at her university. And he made the equally heavy decision not to go with them. He needed air, he needed distance. He needed to sit alone with the wreckage of his life for 5 minutes without someone else's emotions filling the room. The next day, Jamie regained consciousness. She was stable. She was coherent. And the first thing she told the staff? The video had been filmed without her consent. Her family wasted no time. They filed a report with the cybercrime division of their local police department, a 2 hour drive from where he lived. An investigation was now officially open, and suddenly this private heartbreak had become a legal matter with moving parts and people involved that neither of them had ever imagined. Her older sister Jackie became the go between, relaying updates and trying to keep everyone from completely falling apart. She asked him directly, "Are you actually going to end things?" His answer was honest: "I don't know if there's anything left to save." 2 days later, Jamie's parents asked him to come in person. He agreed. When he walked into their living room, Alice, Julio, and Jackie were all there, tired, sad, carrying something heavy that had settled into their bones practically overnight. He felt it too. They talked logistics first: the investigation, his potential role as a witness, since he didn't find the video, Mike did. He confirmed he'd connect Mike with the detectives. They talked about Jamie's mental health plan, her therapy appointments, where she'd be staying. And then they said something that caught him completely off guard. They wanted his parents in the room for the next part of the conversation. He felt a flash of something between embarrassment and frustration. They were adults. This wasn't a high school disciplinary meeting, and his relationship with his father was already strained. The kind of strain that doesn't really heal, it just scars over. But he was exhausted, and he could feel the weight of what almost was: the marriage conversations, the future they had all quietly been building toward. So he let it go and agreed. When they finally talked about Jamie directly, here's what they shared. She was locked in her childhood bedroom, ashamed, devastated, but physically stable. The investigation was moving forward, detectives collecting whatever digital evidence they could piece together, and her psychologist had filed an official assessment: spontaneous psychological breakdown triggered by extreme academic stress and an acute emotional shock. No prior history of mental illness. Treatment plan, rest, safety, consistent support. He listened to all of it, nodded, tried to be respectful of people he genuinely cared about, and then he went home and tried to figure out what any of this meant for him. He didn't get long to think about it, because several nights later his phone rang at 2 in the morning. It was Alice. Her voice was barely holding together. Jamie had locked herself in the bathroom. There was a kitchen knife involved, and she was calling his name. Let that sink in for a second. This woman, who had shattered his trust, who had broken apart everything he thought he knew about their relationship, was in a genuine crisis, and she was asking for him. Not her mom, not her dad, not her sister, who had dropped everything to be there. Him. He didn't stop to think about whether it was fair. He didn't weigh his options or consult anyone. He just got in his car and drove. Fast enough that he later admitted he was genuinely lucky there were no traffic cameras on that highway. When he arrived, Alice and Jackie were outside waiting. They told him Jamie had mostly calmed down, that Julio was with her now, but that she needed to see him. They were begging, and he could see in their faces that this wasn't manipulation. This was pure, raw parental terror. He walked in. When Jamie saw him, she looked like a person who had been drained of everything: color, energy, hope, dark circles carved deep under her eyes. She hadn't slept in what looked like days. She reached toward him with both hands, and without a single word passing between them, he crossed the room and pulled her into his arms. She sobbed. She apologized over and over and over, barely coherent, clutching him like he was the only solid thing left in her world. He didn't say much. He just held her, kept his voice low and steady, and stayed until she finally fell asleep. Then he sat in the quiet and let himself feel the full weight of everything. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Christmas was coming. They were supposed to be planning their future. Instead, he was sitting in her childhood bedroom at 3 a.m., watching the woman he loved sleep after a mental health crisis. A crisis that only existed because she had betrayed him. He thought about everything she had given him, everything she had helped him become. He thought about the journals she told him to keep, and felt the gut punch irony that those same journals were now helping him document the worst chapter of his life in painful, precise detail. She wasn't a villain. That's the part that made this so hard. She was brilliant and patient and warm and deeply, genuinely human, and she had done something that couldn't be undone. The next morning, over coffee in a kitchen that felt like the aftermath of something, Jackie told him what none of them had mentioned before. Jamie had experienced episodes like this twice before. This was the worst one yet. And then the rest of the family came in, and they laid it all out for him like a card table full of cards nobody wanted to play. Alice was in the middle of chemotherapy for breast cancer. Julio was managing a business 40 minutes away. Jackie's employer was already starting to apply pressure about her extended absence. And Jamie, fragile, ashamed, unwell Jamie, needed someone with her. Consistently, someone she trusted completely. They looked at him when they said it. He knew what they were asking. He also knew it wasn't fair. His best friend Alex had already warned him. This is a trap, man. The psych ward is the right answer, not you. But standing in that kitchen, looking at a family he had loved for nearly a decade, a family that had always treated him with kindness, even before they really knew him, he couldn't just walk out. So he said yes. He stayed, at least for now. And the moment those words left his mouth, some part of him already knew he'd made the wrong call. Here's the thing about the truth: it doesn't care about your timing. It doesn't care that you're already overwhelmed, already broken, already running on empty. It just keeps coming, piece by piece, until there's nowhere left to hide from it. And for him, the truth arrived in layers. The cybercrime investigation was moving forward, and slowly, painfully slowly, details started surfacing. Jamie had cooperated with detectives, and through Jackie and Mike, he was getting updates whether he asked for them or not. Here's what they found. The man in the video was a South Korean national, someone Jamie had met through social media. She had initially told investigators it was a one time thing, a single encounter, a mistake she had tried to bury and forget. The detectives didn't buy it, and they were right not to. Because when they pulled the video frame by frame, something became impossible to ignore. Two distinctly different rooms, different lighting, different furniture, different everything. This wasn't one night in one place. This was multiple meetings, carefully kept off the radar of the person who trusted her most. The detectives pressed her hard, and the stories she had been holding together with shaking hands finally fell apart. She admitted to two separate hotel stays, two different locations. And once she admitted that, the dominoes kept falling. Hotel check in records with names and dates, security footage from the first location, private messages between her and this man that painted a picture nobody in that investigation wanted to look at for too long. It was all there, documented, undeniable. Now, as for the hidden camera, that was where things got legally complicated. Because, as disgusting as that violation was, proving who planted it was a different battle entirely. The man had checked into the hotel the night before. The camera itself, gone by the time anyone thought to look for it. No physical evidence directly linking him to the recording, just circumstantial threads that any halfway decent defense attorney could unravel in front of a jury. And then came the part that made everything even more infuriating. He was already back in South Korea. The local police could document everything. They could build a file. They could reach out to Korean authorities and hope for international cooperation. But according to the lawyer Jamie's family consulted, the case was, for all practical purposes, dead in the water. Too many variables, too many legal escape hatches, too much distance between the crime and any realistic consequence. The man who violated Jamie, who filmed her without consent and uploaded that video to the internet, was going to walk away clean. No charges, no accountability, no justice. Just nothing. And somewhere in the middle of processing that particular gut punch, he was also quietly processing something else. Something that had nothing to do with the legal case and everything to do with his own heart. Why did she do it? He had never directly asked her. In all the chaos, the breakdown, the hospital, the 2 a.m. phone calls, the family meetings, that one central question had never been answered out loud. And for a while, he told himself it didn't matter. That no explanation could undo the damage. That why was just another door he wasn't sure he wanted to open. But it was always there, that quiet, stubborn question sitting in the corner of every room he walked into. He never got a real answer, not directly from her. And at some point, somewhere between the therapy sessions he had started attending and the long, honest conversations with Alex that stripped everything down to its bones, he arrived at a realization that surprised even him. It didn't matter anymore. Not because he didn't care, but because no answer she could give him would change the fundamental truth of what had happened. She had made choices, repeated choices, across multiple meetings, across multiple locations, and she had made them while he was at home building a life around her. The why was her burden to carry. His job was to figure out what came next for him, and that's when things started to shift. He had been seeing a behavioral therapist, something he admitted he should have done years ago, long before any of this happened. And in those sessions, sitting across from someone who asked the kind of hard questions that most people spend their whole lives avoiding, he started to see his situation with new eyes. Not just the betrayal, not just Jamie, everything. His complicated relationship with his father, the emotional walls he had built so high and so early that he barely noticed they were there. The way he had unconsciously leaned on Jamie as both a partner and a therapist, which was never fair to either of them. The unprocessed anger and anxiety from a childhood that left marks he had never properly tended to. None of that was Jamie's fault. None of it excused what she did. But sitting in that therapist's chair, he started to understand something important. He had work to do on himself that had nothing to do with her. And that work couldn't happen here, not in this city, not in this apartment with this furniture and these walls that held 8 years of a life that no longer existed. He needed to leave. The decision didn't come in a single dramatic moment. It built quietly, the way important decisions usually do. through small realizations stacking on top of each other until the conclusion becomes impossible to argue with. He reached out to the family he actually considered his real family, not his biological parents, but the four aunts who had raised him, who had shown up for him when his own father couldn't be bothered. And what they told him broke him open in an entirely different way. They had known Jamie, really known her. She had called them, talked to them about him, asking what foods he loved, what made him laugh, how to handle him when he was struggling, what his childhood had been like. She had been quietly, carefully learning him through the people who knew him best, and those same aunts had been saving money for years for a wedding they had never been officially invited to plan but had decided to prepare for anyway because they saw how he looked at her and they knew. When everything fell apart, they made a decision without him having to ask. Half of what they had saved was now his. A lifeline, a way out. He gave his notice at work. He broke his lease. He started quietly, methodically, deliberately, putting his old life into boxes, some to take, most to leave behind. He told Jamie's family he was going, not as an act of cruelty, not in anger. He set them down, gave them contact information for psychiatric hospitalization resources, walked them through Jamie's upcoming therapy appointments, and made sure they understood what they were taking on. He was handing something back to the people it belonged to, their daughter, and he was doing it with more grace than most people could have managed. Was there pressure to stay? Absolutely. Were there tears? Yes. Was there a moment where Alice, a woman going through chemotherapy, exhausted in every possible direction, looked at him with eyes that made him feel like the worst person alive? Yes. And he stayed the course anyway. Because Alex had been right from the beginning, because his therapist had been right, because somewhere deep down, beneath all the love and loyalty and grief, he had been right, even when he didn't want to be. He was not her keeper, he was not her therapist. He was not the solution to consequences she had created. He could love her, he did love her, maybe always would on some level, and still understand that loving someone doesn't obligate you to destroy yourself for them. The night before he left, he thought about calling her. He thought about going over, sitting across from her one last time, asking that question he had never asked out loud. He didn't. Instead, he sat down and wrote her a letter. He thanked her, genuinely thanked her, for the years they had shared, for the joy, for the growth, for the version of himself she had helped him become. He told her that the love had been real, that the memories were real, that none of that would ever be erased just because the ending was painful. And then he said goodbye, not in bitterness, not in rage, in something quieter and more final than either of those things, with his head up, with his spine straight. With dignity, he was leaving, for good, and in the rubble of everything he had lost, he could just barely make out the shape of something that might, eventually, become a life worth living. A loving family waiting for him, a therapist who was already helping him excavate the parts of himself that needed air and light, a best friend who had told him the hard truth from day one and would answer the phone no matter what time he called, and the quiet, unshakable knowledge that through all of it, he had shown up as the best version of himself he knew how to be. That's not nothing. That's actually everything. Some stories don't end with a villain getting what they deserve. Some stories don't end with a tearful reconciliation, a grand gesture, or a moment that wraps everything up in a bow neat enough to post on social media. Some stories just end quietly, painfully, with a packed bag and a letter left on a table and a door closing softly behind you. And somehow, that can still be the right ending. Let's take a step back for a second and look at everything this man walked through. He found out about his girlfriend's infidelity not from a confession, not from a gut feeling, not from a suspicious text, but from a video. A video that a stranger had stumbled across on the internet. 8 years of his life reduced to something he couldn't even watch for 60 seconds before he had to look away. He handled the initial shock with more composure than most people could even pretend to have. He didn't go home and blow up. He didn't do anything reckless. He leaned on his friend, slept on a couch, and gave himself one night before facing the conversation that would change everything. When Jamie shut down completely, checked out of reality mid argument, he didn't leave her on the kitchen floor. He carried her to bed. He called her parents. He stayed until help arrived. And then he stepped back because he knew, even through all the grief and fury, that he was not the right person to manage her mental health crisis. He went to therapy, he talked to his family, he made hard phone calls and harder decisions. He connected the right people with the right resources. He walked away from a situation that was actively consuming him, not in a blaze of anger and drama, but with intention, with care, with a handwritten letter that most people in his position would never have bothered to write. And when the legal system failed, when the man who filmed Jamie without her consent got to walk free on the other side of the world with zero consequences, he didn't spiral. He grieved it. He acknowledged how profoundly unjust it was, and then he kept moving. That is what strength actually looks like. Not punching walls, not public meltdowns, not a social media war, just a person, making one hard choice after another, refusing to let the worst thing that ever happened to him become him. Now, here's the part I want you to sit with for a moment. Because this story isn't really just about infidelity, it's not just about a video or a breakdown or an investigation that went nowhere. It's about what you owe someone who has hurt you. And the answer, the real, honest, uncomfortable answer, is nothing. You owe them nothing. Not your presence, not your sacrifice, not your mental health, not your future. Love is not the same thing as obligation. Caring about someone is not the same thing as being responsible for the consequences of their choices. These two things get tangled up so easily, especially when history is involved, especially when you have years of shared memories pulling you backward every time you try to move forward. He loved Jamie. That was never in question. He still loved her, even as he was packing his bags and saying goodbye. Love didn't disappear just because trust did. And that's the part nobody talks about enough. The way you can grieve the loss of a relationship, even when leaving is absolutely the right thing to do. The grief is real, the love is real. And the decision to walk away can also be real, all at the same time. He wasn't a hero for leaving. He wasn't cold or heartless or selfish. He was a human being who finally chose himself. After years of being strong for everyone else, after absorbing blow after blow with quiet resilience, he decided that he deserved the same level of care and protection he had been extending to everyone around him. And the moment he made that decision, the fog started to lift. There's one more thing worth mentioning before we close this out. Remember those four aunts, the women who actually raised him, who quietly saved money for a wedding they were never officially asked to help plan, who had spent years learning him through his girlfriend's phone calls and questions? When everything fell apart, they didn't hesitate. They didn't ask for explanations or assign blame or demand he justify his choices to them. They just said, "Come home. Here's what we saved. You're not doing this alone." That's family. Not necessarily the people who share your blood, the people who show up in the dark without being asked and make space for you to fall apart safely. He had Alex, who told him the hard truth from night one and meant every word of "call me whenever you need me." He had four women who loved him enough to save for a future they only hoped he'd have. He had a therapist who asked the questions that cracked him open in the best possible way. And on the other side of all that loss and chaos and heartbreak, he had himself. Clearer, stronger, more honest than he had been in years, armed with journals that Jamie, ironically, beautifully, painfully, had taught him to keep. She gave him the tools to document his own survival. You can't make that up. So, what do we take from all of this? We take the reminder that betrayal doesn't get to write the final chapter of your story, that walking away with dignity is its own kind of victory, even when it doesn't feel like one, that asking for help from friends, from family, from a professional is never weakness, that loving someone and leaving them can exist in the same breath. We take the reminder that you are not responsible for managing the consequences of someone else's choices, no matter how much history you share, no matter how much love is still sitting quietly in your chest, no matter how hard someone cries or how desperately a family begs. You are allowed to grieve and go at the same time. And we take the reminder, maybe the most important one of all, that the people who show up for you in the dark are worth more than anything, more than a perfect relationship, more than a future that looked good on paper. Find those people, keep them close, answer the phone when they call. That's the story. All of it. A man who had everything lost it in 60 seconds of footage, and somehow, through therapy and honesty and the kind of quiet courage that doesn't make the highlight reel, came out the other side standing. Not fixed, not over it, not magically healed, just standing. Head up, spine straight, and sometimes that's the whole victory right there. If this story hit you somewhere real, if you found yourself nodding along, or thinking of someone you know, or sitting with something you've been carrying too long, drop it in the comments. This community is built on real conversations about real human experiences, and yours matters here. And if you're new here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button because we tell stories like this every single week. Stories about real people, real heartbreak, real decisions, and what it actually looks like to find your way through. You don't want to miss what's coming next. Like this video if it was worth your time. Share it with someone who needs to hear that walking away with dignity is always an option, no matter how deep in it they are. We'll see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves out there. Seriously,